Good day, chaps. So today's video is going to cover another one of those American oddities you seem to like. A twin-gunned, rocket-firing, low-profile and heavily armoured vehicle designed in the early 1950s. It's the Hunter tank by Rheem. We were lucky to have been given a copy of the original materials for the Hunter by our good friends at the US Army Armour and Cavalry Collection. Quite possibly the best collection of military vehicles in the world. And if you don't, for whatever reason, know who they are, I've added a link below. So as with the other vehicles we've done on similar American machines, we're first going to take a look at the company before checking out the tank itself. The Rheem Manufacturing Company can trace its roots back to three brothers, Richard, Donald and William Rheem, the sons of William S. Rheem, who was the president of Standard Oil in Richmond, California. Richard and Donald would form the Pacific Galvanizing Company, and a second firm, the Rheem Manufacturing Company, a few years later. One firm made steel drums, and the second would galvanize them, before being logically merged into one firm. In the 1930s, the Rheem brothers bought out the Republic Steel Company, and later the John Wood Company of California. Rheem moved from their headquarters in Emeryville into Richmond, but continued to buy up smaller firms that produced similar products throughout the 1930s, and were the leading manufacturers of barrels, shipping containers, water heaters, as well as munition boxes and jerry cans. During the Second World War, the US government took over several firms and businesses for the war effort, and one of these was the Bethlehem Steelworks in Danville, which was seized by the Navy and handed over to Rheem to produce shells and bombs, as well as an assortment of other bits such as propeller shafts. While on the coast, they were originally in charge of a shipyard in Providence, Rhode Island, building Liberty ships. However, this didn't pan out so well, and after just 6 Liberty ships were made, the yards were taken over by the Walsh-Kaiser Company, who went on to produce the Colony-class frigates for the British, and a large number of attack cargo ships for the US. Other than this small setback, however, Rheem continued to produce armaments and parts of the war effort, winning several awards for production quotas, while expanding out to Australia, producing their own wartime magazine, the Reminder, and took an interest in the Piet-LePage Aircraft Company, as well as aircraft in general, with a collaboration between themselves and Max Harlow's PJC series of light aircraft, with the hope of possibly securing a contract for trainer aircraft. However, none was forthcoming, although Rheem would keep their eyes on aviation for some time. Post-war, the firm would continue to grow, buying up the odd barrel maker here or boiler factory there, but in 1951 they added 3 new areas. One was the Rheem Government Products Division, which would be responsible for making or designing equipment for the US military, which would split shortly after into the Aircraft Division for research and production of ordnance and aircraft materials, and the Electronics Division for researching manufacturing of military and commercial products. The first made parts of a variety of weapons and so on, such as the American Beaumark missiles, and they also built and designed unmanned drones. However, this side would later be bought out by Aerojet. The electronics side was a bit weirder, as Rheem decided to go branching out into musical instruments and portable record players. Although this did not appear to last for too long, these can still be found on eBay today. But it's around this time that Rheem also took a look at making and producing tanks for the army. After all, they had all the right ingredients. It owned steel mills, rail stock, research and development divisions, and it had the right contacts, and so it began to design tanks for the Department of Defense. Rheem worked on several experimental turrets of different tanks, notably the T-54, T-69 and T-77, each of which featured heavy tank guns, autoloaders, and large access hatches on oscillating turret mounts. Rheem would design and build these turrets between 1951 and 1956, and often present the tank board with a model made in metal first, some of which can still be found today, and at least one of which was recovered and gifted back to Fort Benning. The timeline for the Hunter begins in the middle of this development period in September 1953, following a feasibility study for the proposed development of a new heavy gun tank. This was an interesting time in US tank development, especially as around this time of the T-48 tank project, and various contracts and designs were also submitted in that period, 3 of which we've covered before, the tanks of Yo and the Astron projects. However, whether the Hunter is itself tied to these series of programs directly is unclear, but their willingness to use unorthodox layouts would indicate a connection at some point. Once the initial plans had been given the go-ahead, Rheem began to work on various aspects of the vehicle. They set to going down a path with 2 guns with automatic loaders, the well-sloped armour, and an unusual but durable suspension system. So we'll look at each part in turn and start with the armour. The Rheem team opted to go for a cast hull design with either a few pieces or multi-pieces, and both General Steel Castings Company and Birdsboro Machine and Foundry were approached, along with the Watertown and Frankfurt arsenals, to see if they could make these large pieces. All agreed that it was possible and that a single casting would be ideal, and that there were sufficient foundry facilities to produce the vehicles if needed. 2 separate layouts were discussed, the R8 and R7. The only real difference between the two was slightly less armour on the R8 side areas, saving about 5 tons and increasing the range of the vehicle about 15 miles. Other than this, it doesn't really crop up again. The armour itself was very well sloped and angled to make the best use of its obliquity, while providing a small profile, only 60% of that of the American T43 tank. Steel armour was the go-to of the day. However, the Hunter's armour was also embedded with silicious cord inserts, or fused silica between the inner and outer layers of armour, also nicknamed glass armour. This provided superb protection against shaped charge attacks, which were the primary threat of the day, and what Rheem calculated to be was 18 inches or 457mm of protection against heat. Inside every Hunter, there was also to be a nylon ballistic spool sheet that was connected to the inner armour. This sheet would seal any gaps or joints in the hull, but also work as a spool liner to protect the crew, although personally I can't see how this would have worked in the rotating turret. The turret itself is an odd design as well, being a ball oscillating type mounted directly in a pit, which gave it a low profile, but only 180 degrees of rotation. However, a full 10 degrees of gun depression was possible, as well as 20 degrees of elevation. Another unusual feature was a carryover from other Rheem turret designs, in the form of a very large back super hatch. Rather than having a conventional engine decks and exits, the Hunter had 1 regular cupola exit and 1 bottom escape hatch, but if needed, the entire rear of the tank could spring open in a beetle wing style shell. This allowed not only quicker maintenance access for things such as engine changes, but also provided a solid shield to protect the crew when bailing out. So on to firepower. The Hunter design was quite radical here too. Rather than the conventional turreted layout, they went with a forward semi-turret, with 2 fully automatic, rigidly mounted 105mm rocket guns, although a standard high-pressure 105 conventional tank gun was looked at. These guns would each use a 7-round magazine, firing low recoil rockets, with the empty carry cases ejected out of the top and away from the turret. Each gun could fire separately, or together, in salvos of 1 or 3 shots, and had a rate of fire of 120 rounds per minute, and one gun could still fire even if the other was knocked out, or continue to fire while the second was going through a fast reload inside. The only limitation was the total ammunition held of 94 rounds. The rockets themselves were built and tested at the Ballistic Research Laboratory at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, where the heat rockets were able to perforate 18 inches of steel. However, there are 2 caveats, both of which are somewhat obscured in their text. The first is that when the turret was rotated far left or right, the rate of fire drops to 8 rounds per minute per gun, and when fully depressed to -10 degrees or elevated to +20 degrees, the rate of fire is recorded as only 2 rounds per minute. The reason why is not explained, and is more or less small printed in if you look. The second issue is the range, and this is by far the biggest fault of the tank as a whole, and quite possibly the reason it never got out of the concept stage. The range of the rounds to accurately hit was recorded at 500 yards. After that, nothing further is recorded, and so one can surmise that it's because beyond this range, the accuracy significantly falls off. This would require the Hunter to get into almost knife fighting distance in tank terms to be able to devastate its foes, and that would not have been desirable to the US at the time. Secondary protection was provided by an armoured cupola. This would come as either a flat hatch or an armoured raise system like many US tanks of the period, with a single .50. For extra protection, a sort of dual hybrid system with two .50s for soft skin and anti-aircraft was developed, and a further two .30 machine guns are in the turret, with each mounted above the gun for a total 4 machine guns with 2,000 rounds each. And finally there's the mobility. The Hunter was to have mounted the AOI 1490-1 petrol engine, delivering 647 gross horsepower and 500 net, coupled with an Allison TX500 gearbox, for a speed of 30 miles an hour and a range of around 120 miles. However, while the engine was relatively normal for this period of design, the rest of the transmission was not. Rather than rely entirely on a rear sprocket to drive the tank, they came up with an odd alternative, in that each wheel also had a built-in hydraulic motor. Each wheel would also have its own teeth, and the track was of a Dunlop rubber band design, made in sections, which fitted the wheels and allowed quick changes, but more importantly, the Hunter could still move with one or more of its tracks destroyed, and even with several road wheels crippled on both sides. Each wheel/motor unit was then attached to the hull via a liquid spring system made by the Cleveland Pneumatic Tool Company, who normally made landing gear for aircraft. To assist the Hunter, an auxiliary engine by the Solar Aircraft Company was situated in the vehicle's right-hand side, or a Detroit diesel if needed. And finally there's the squishy bits, or the crew as they prefer to be called. Each Hunter would have 4. A driver front and centre, with 3x T25 periscopes with infrared filters. The commander had the same but with 6 points of vision, while the gunner had a single T25. The gunner sat below the turret centre, while the commander and loader sat behind him side by side, with commander to the left and loader to the right as you faced the tank. The loader had all the ammunition on his side, which could be rapidly fed into the ammunition drum as the gunner cycled between them, the weight difference being offset by the auxiliary engine on the other side. Each Hunter was also able to fit an optical rangefinder and an Optar rangefinder, which could be mounted on the cupola if needed along with infrared spotlights. In the end, the Hunter would not be accepted, although the exact reasons have not been found. It is most likely a combination of the weapon choice being too short to range, and many untried or unproven technologies that usually put the Army off. We reached out to Rheem to see if they knew any more, but it seems that as a whole they wish to forget or even excuse themselves from the defence side of things, with only a token nod to their defence past found in any of their current materials, and a complete stonewall of silence when asked directly, which I found to be a bit of a shame, as other companies we covered were surprised but interested to know about their past, rather than what appears to be ashamed. As to the Rheem brothers, Donald Rheem passed away in 1958, but not before naming a whole town after himself, as well as shops, a main road, a valley and a cinema he designed, most of which can still be found and is now part of Moraga in California. His brother Richard passed away in 1971. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed that odd video. I've had requests for the Hunter before, and I needed to gather some archive information to make it work. So again, thanks to the Armour and Cavalry collection for helping out with that. If you have any other vehicles you would like to know more about, let me know below, and until next time, toodle pip.